Thank you so much for that detailed introduction, and thank you so much, everyone, for turning up here this morning to remember and celebrate the first diplomats of India, Nehru's first recruits. And sometimes really you have to look at the panel to figure out what we are going to discuss in a particular panel. And we have with us today some of the most distinguished figures from the field of Indian diplomacy and, of course, Indian Foreign Service. These days, of course, it's a matter of daily record that we have Indian Foreign Service officers talking about India on various world platforms. But 70 years ago, 77 years ago, it was a new thing. So just to illustrate the point, I would urge you to look at the screens here. And you will find some of the first recruits, just a section of them who are here. And to the extreme left, there is a young man standing in the left. He is none other than the son of Rajasthan, Mr. K. Natwar Singh, who passed away very recently. And it was during a conversation with Mr. K. Natwar Singh that the idea of this particular book came up. And, that was the time when the country was facing all sorts of turmoil, food crisis. The country was divided. There were communal killings. But then in the middle of that, a new system was devised. And of course, the new batch of, new wing of diplomacy, of young diplomats started. So to discuss that, we have with us some of the successors and the links with their generation. So I would urge ma'am to start and remember some of those days, when you started in the 1970s and how it was to be a young diplomat at that time.
Thank you, Kallol. Thank you for writing this book. When I was in the US, there used to be this, or they started this ancestry.com. And you could check your DNA, your ancestry. And I think this book, to me and to all of us, in some ways provides that kind of an insight into our diplomatic ancestry. So thank you for that. And although I found that the book has been written somewhat in a stream of consciousness, James Joycean style, where you mix personal anecdotes, biopics, and tidbits about the service, how it came about, the institutional aspects, the politics and policies. But it does contain many nuggets of information that are very valuable today for many of us who have, of course, now retired. I think all of us are retired, but even the ones who are practicing diplomats today will learn much, because I believe that we must know our past, where we came from, what distances we have traveled since, in order to better know our present and where we go in the future. And, we have this goal of a Vikasit Bharat and a developed country. And it's a far cry from when we started. And so one major aspect of, what made me think about, you referred to the Indian School of Diplomacy. And that set me thinking, what is the Indian School of Diplomacy? Is there an Indian School of Diplomacy? And what I really looked at all the characters that you have delineated in your book, and those that I have known about as a child. Bhattacherjee was this young, dashing second secretary in Nepal when my father was legal advisor there, and I was there as a child, and I still remember him. Then there was Harishwar Dayal, who was the ambassador at that time, and his wife Leela Rao, the great tennis player and Sanskrit scholar. And then there were, but I started my career with Ambassador Eric Gonzalez, about whom I'm so happy you have dedicated a whole chapter and shown how he very creatively and boldly mapped out a rescue and response to the crisis that the Indian community in Myanmar was facing at that time. So I started with my career with Ambassador Eric Gonzalez, outstanding role model to begin your, because they say your first ambassador is like your first love. It stays with you. What he teaches you, how he molds you and encourages you, I think is so important. So he was one of the tallest foreign service, the first recruits from the examination he came.
97.
Yes.
Well.
I was there in 75 with him, Hardeep and I. And then Mani Dixit is the other, exemplar. In the true Kautilian sense, he was a diplomat par excellence. He was both strategic, he had that strategic vision, he could see long term, but also tactically, nobody could beat him. Intellectual agility and firepower, all of that. And bilateralist, particularly with the neighbors. I think that was his great strength, that he was in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and also Sri Lanka, of course, where we were with him. He was known as the Viceroy, and he was the architect of the Indo-Sri Lanka peace agreement. And, it was a very difficult situation. And whatever you may say about the peace agreement, it was one of those opportunities that was provided, and I wish it had been seized by the Sri Lankan government at that time and the people. But anyway, so that he's the other giant. And then Mujkund Dubey. He was my permanent representative in Geneva. And he, again, is one of the, I would say, globally, one would call him, a multilateralist par excellence. He covered every area, from defining the UN's development decade, to being a disarmament specialist, to being a human rights specialist. So every area he covered. And he was recognized as a giant in that field. But also he's, and I had the privilege of being part of the economic diplomacy that was launched in the Ministry of External Affairs under his leadership. And when he became foreign secretary, he really emphasized that a lot. So each one of them had their, qualities which created this, what you may call the Indian school of diplomacy and its traditions. And I think what is very important to know, that when these people started their careers, India was dreaming big, thinking big, but in a very weak situation in terms of its own powers, military power, economic power. So they started this tradition of wielding the power of argument, because we didn't have the argument of power. So that is the great, the argumentative Indian, to have that, arsenal of intellectual arguments, depth, and to be able to also be a voice of moral suasion, rather than, be using, the threats. And also being able to, I've seen all of these and many others from that generation, being the ultimate diplomat. And that, as they say, I think David Frost said this, that being the ultimate diplomat is to make the other side be your advocate and be convinced of your, not only convinced, but adopt your agenda. So I think they were really, in so many ways, exemplars for our generation and succeeding generations, and they continue to, and I think we have much to learn. Even today's diplomats have much to learn, and they are privileged to be diplomats at a time when India is being seen as, that this is going to be the decade of India, this is going to be the century of India. So the diplomats of this golden age that is coming will have to also learn much from these giants of the past, and your book indeed provides many insights on that.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Puri. The photograph that we showed at the beginning of this conversation was actually a cross-section of 401 diplomats who were hired by Prime Minister Nehru and his team. Because today, of course, 401 may look like as if a very small number, but at that time, starting from zero, that was some sort of an achievement. And right in the middle of this photograph, you can find none other than, of course, it's a little difficult to locate here, the father of Amitabh Bachchan, Harivansh Rai Bachchan, who was also a diplomat, and he was the teacher of, Hindi teacher in the Ministry of External Affairs, and he taught Hindi to many, including the late Natwar Singh, who is, as I pointed out, in the corner. And one of the things that started at that time was that the people were hired from various walks of life. They came from politics, they came from ICS, police service, intelligence, translators, literary figures like Madanjit Singh and, of course, Harivansh Rai. And people from political life and also rebels, like people who fought in the freedom movement, Muhammad Yunus, for example. And just to talk about one such figure, I would turn to Ambassador T.C.A. Raghavan, because he has actually dealt with one such figure in his new book. That's Mr. Asaf Ali, who was India's first ambassador to the United States. So I would urge Ambassador Raghavan to talk about how it was, to hire people from sort of non-diplomatic, non-official walks of lives and their careers, and were they really integrated into the service, and were there disputes and discords that also broke out from time to time? Ambassador Raghavan.
Well, thank you, and wonderful to be in this very distinguished panel. Now, Asaf Ali was not just the first ambassador to the United States, India's first ambassador, period. And he was sent to Washington in an impossible situation. He went there in December or January 1947, when India was not yet a sovereign country. This was the time of the interim government. And it was an impossible brief, because he asked everyone that, what do I do as ambassador? Is there a handbook? Is there instructions? What do I do in terms of entertainment and protocol? Which flag do I fly over the chancery? And there was no flag then. So we couldn't fly the British flag. So the compromise was, don't fly a flag. And then how should he conduct himself? He was guided towards Mahatma Gandhi. So he went off to Noakhali, where Mahatma Gandhi then was, and Mahatma Gandhi told him, you have to be a Gandhian. So that was the one-line brief he received, and he obviously couldn't live up to that brief, because thereafter, through all of Mahatma Gandhi's time in East Bengal, thereafter in Bihar, in the middle of the communal writing, one comment which he constantly makes is that Asaf Ali is spending too much money, and number two, he drinks too much. So, but I think, Asaf Ali came from a political background. He had been a Congress worker all his life. He had spent many years in jail, and he was possibly picked for the post to show that there is a new India emerging. He was, I'll try to be brief, because I know Navtej and Vikas will have a lot to say also. but he faced a tremendous amount of criticism from two quarters. And I've tried in my book, in a sense, to rescue him from the condescension of posterity. One criticism came from people like us, who were the ICS and the ones who joined the Foreign Service through an exam, we felt they're professional diplomats. I mean, who is this guy and what does he know about diplomacy? The others came from a privileged caste within the Indian National Congress who've had a sense of entitlement where it came to dealing with the United Kingdom and the United States. And this was led by Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. So poor Asaf Ali was criticized by both these sets of people that he doesn't know what he is doing. I would think that he discharged what was an impossible task, as I said, quite creditably. And he did all the right things. He made a certain name for himself in the UN General Assembly first special session on Palestine. And it was a name because he angered both the Arabs and the and the Israelis. Everyone was unhappy with him. So he was obviously doing the right thing. So I would say, yes, it was a time, he was India's first diplomat before diplomacy or an Indian school of diplomacy had really emerged. And it's good that we recall his contribution today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raghavan. We just discussed Asaf Ali, and if I can mention, the way Nehru and his team hired or recruited the first diplomats perhaps was really unique. And one such person who was hired at that time was a Caribbean, a man who came from the Caribbeans. He was basically one of the first spokespersons of the Ministry of External Affairs, and I would ask, Ambassador Navtej Sarna to talk about his experience of meeting the first recruits.
Well, thank you. I presume you're asking me because you mentioned the spokesperson, but I never met Mr. Bahadur Singh, unfortunately. I joined the service when we caught the fag end of the last recruits. Many of them were still around. And, for us as youngsters, and I'm talking of 1980, there was a magical feeling about the Ministry of External Affairs. There was a kind of, I still remember walking in first day and looking up at the dome of South Block and saying, how did I get here? And there was this feeling of reverence almost. You knew you were walking on hallowed ground. When you saw these names outside their offices, you said, these are doyens, these are sort of demigods. And one of the things was what you have brought out in the title and your book, that they had been selected by Jawaharlal Nehru. That itself was something which gave you this thing that, my God, these people may be special. No, I'm not saying whether all of them were demigods or not. Everybody has their weak point. Not all. But, as I said, for instance, Ram Sate was Foreign Secretary when I came, and he had not come through the exam. And even the first recruits who came through the exam were interviewed by the Prime Minister. In any case, I had the good fortune of that year when Mr. Ram Sate demitted office as Foreign Secretary and Mr. Raskotra took over. I was the youngest member of the Indian Foreign Service present in Delhi. I was the youngest member in the service. And there was a great tradition. I want to mention this because, tradition is such a big thing of the Foreign Service. They had a farewell dinner for Mr. Sate and a welcome for Mr. Raskotra in the lawns of Hyderabad House, where there was only one table of 8 people set in the middle of the lawn. The rest of the service was standing in the shadows. And on this table, there were the incoming Foreign Secretary and his wife, the outgoing Foreign Secretary and his wife, 2 very senior officers of the administration, and yours truly. And I gave the speech, the farewell speech for the outgoing Foreign Secretary. Now, this was a tradition. I think it's been long lost, this tradition. But I thought I had reached my peak in the Foreign Service and should actually have resigned there and then. But then, some of these people that you mention, they taught us all a lot, honestly speaking. And there was a lot of stress on something which, Raghavan touched on tangentially, but didn't complete the story, that one of Asaf Ali's main worries was, how do I get my sherwani stitched? And then nobody wanted to give him the allowance, as is mentioned in Raghavan's book, to get your sherwani stitched. We used to get we were a developing economy even in the 80s, and we used to get, when we were given my outfit allowance, the Joint Secretary said, here's your outfit allowance, you can get a shirt or your wife can get a blouse. So, so that's the way it used to be. But nevertheless, what I'm talking of is there was this stress on protocol, there was stress on dress, there was a stress on doing the right thing, there was a stress on language. I mean, these were the sort of things you worked with. And there was a lot of stress, since we are all writers, there was a lot of stress on the written word. You mentioned Mr. Natwar Singh. Now, Mr. Natwar Singh I had great exposure to when I was spokesman. He was the foreign minister, and I traveled a lot with him, as did Vikas. And after he would finish his meetings, the first thing he wanted to do is, chalo, let's find a bookshop. And we'd be out, including in Islamabad, looking into bookshops and there was also a tremendous sense of the right thing to do. I was the spokesman. I had a lakhs of budget to buy any book I wanted. And, I could have bought 500 copies of the foreign minister's book to make him happy. But one of the first things he did was issued a note to me saying that no book of mine will be bought at official expense. And these are things you remember. And there were many other stories. I don't know how much time we had, but I don't think my first ambassador, whom I admired hugely, I can call him my first love. Because I didn't see him for the first 6 months that I was in the mission. He was so senior. It was Mr. Vishnu Ahuja in Moscow. He was so senior, and he had spent so much time in Moscow that the local urban legend was that he doesn't even need gloves. And he used to be, we were dealt with by the deputy chief of mission. Yeah, he was somewhere there dealing with Kosygin and Brezhnev and various other doyens. And one day he saw me sort of with a couple of my batchmates strolling around the embassy, and he asked someone, who are these people? So somebody told him they are IFS probationers. We used to be called probationers, which I think is a great term. Now they're called OTs, officer trainees. So they said, who are these people? They said, oh, they are probationers. Oh, probationers? I have probationers? Call them home this evening. And so the four of us went back because we were, dressed like teenagers. We went back. I took out my crushed bangala. I ironed it and, various things, and reached the house. And that evening, and this was the tradition again, he had nobody else. He had the four of us around him in a small sofa arrangement. He opened the best champagne. There was only caviar to eat. And he gave us 2 hours or so of his precious time and advice and encouragement and mentoring, and then didn't see us again for the next 6 months. But there were so many other stories. You mentioned Mr. Muchkundube. He had this tremendous reputation that if he doesn't like what you've done on the file, he will throw the file at you. And the worst thing that can be said in bureaucracy is he flings the file at you. I've never actually seen anybody fling a file at me. And the first time I was exposed to him, I was told, this is in Yugoslavia, erstwhile Yugoslavia. There was a visit of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. I was working on the visit, and I was told, please go and show these papers and get the comments of Mr. Muchkundube. He can't come down because he's in bed with fever. So I was told, here is a man who flings files. Now he's in bed with fever. I've had it. And I actually knocked on the door, and I went in with the papers. And he was the kindest and the gentlest man possible, who did this. And of course, there have been so many others. You mentioned Mr. Brijesh Mishra in your book. You talked to him. Again, one of, a person who you could talk to for an hour and within a second, he would know exactly what the point of the whole thing is and what does. Well, the most clear-headed person that I've ever interacted with in the foreign service. So there were all sorts of people. I'm not saying everybody was perfect. Everybody had their strong points and their weak points and their stories and their backgrounds, like all of us have. But thank you for recalling all that. We are grateful that you've put it between the covers of a book.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sarna. You see, the first recruits were basically, they were, of course, direct recruits, as the ambassadors were talking about. They were recruited through the competitive examinations. And then there were many others who were recruited according to maybe the decisions taken by the political leadership. And Vishnu Ahuja, I want to add here, was one of the first direct recruits. He joined in 1948, if I'm not wrong. And there were many direct recruits who actually continued to serve and also be very prominent in public life. One of them was, of course, Natwar Singh. I just wanted Ambassador Swarup to talk about him.
Thank you, Kallol, for putting me on this panel and for writing this brilliant book on India's Nehru's first recruits. So I had the good fortune of working with Mr. Natwar Singh as his director in charge of his office, Director EAMO. I don't think anyone here has served as Director EAMO. So that's a relationship. You're almost like his private secretary.
I was too.
You were also, but not with
Jaswant.
Yes, that's right. So, you work very closely with him and you travel with him on, most of the flights, etc. And I would second what Ambassador Sarna said. He was a man of great erudition, which he wore very lightly, in fact. The fact that he knew people like E.M. Foster and Mulk Raj Anand, all these great doyens of literature, etc. He had made very early friendships with them. And he was always ready to engage with, people, men with ideas. And whenever we used to travel abroad, we used to get what is known as the, daily allowance. He would just hand over his, $50 or $100, whatever it was, and say, go to the bookshop and buy me Anna Akhmatova's poems or something like that. That's the kind of a person he was. And he was himself a great writer. He has written, I think 6 or 7 books, many of them detailing his own personal experiences of when he was posted in China, for instance, and he met Mao Zedong and, Zhou Enlai, etc. And the book called Walking with Lions has a delightful episode. He was one of those first recruits who worked with Jawaharlal Nehru. Later on, he worked with Indira Gandhi, then with Rajiv Gandhi. And he says that the king of Cambodia at that time was Nordam Singhanuk. And he had met Nehru in Phnom Penh, and Nehru had said that we were coming to the Bandung conference, why don't you stop over in India? So he decides to visit India, I think from the 16th to the 24th of March, 1955, on his way to Bandung. And Natwar Singh was appointed as his liaison officer, that you go and be with the king. So he goes with Prime Minister Nehru to Palam Airport to receive the king. And Nehru and Mr. Natwar Singh are waiting for the plane to land, and they see a plane approaching. And the plane is approaching, it is coming down, and then it goes up again. And they are very worried, what is happening? And then again the plane tries to come down, and again it goes up. And this goes on for about 10 minutes. The plane is approaching but not landing. Finally, on the last approach, the plane does land. So, and the king comes down from the ladder, and Nehru greets him, and he says, Excellency, very curious. Why was it that, you were circling but you were not landing? We were very worried. He says, my pilot is a French. And he had a map of 1936, which did not show Palam Airport at all. The only airport in India at that time was Safdarjung Airport. The other good fortune I had was, as a very young undersecretary, I had the privilege of working with Mr. J.N. Dixit. And the reason for that was, Mr. Dixit's favorite officer was Ambassador Hardeep Puri, and Ambassador Hardeep's favorite officer was yours truly. So that's why, as a young Undersecretary AMS, I had the opportunity of working closely with him. And he was, as Ambassador Lakshmi Puri said, he was certainly probably one of the most gifted, genius, diplomats of our time. But he also had a very impish sense of humor. And I'll just narrate one instance. This is when he was posted in Sri Lanka between 1985 and 1989. And as Ambassador Puri pointed out, that was a very momentous period in Indo-Sri Lanka relations. The India-Sri Lanka Accord was signed, and then subsequently the India peacekeeping force was deployed in Sri Lanka. And we all know that turned out very badly for us. We didn't win laurels from either side. So he was narrating the story one day that those of you who have known Ambassador Dixit, he was short-statured. And it so happened that his immediate predecessor in Sri Lanka was also short-statured. And his immediate predecessor was also short-statured. So this is what Mr. J.N. Dixit claims. So he says that, the Sri Lankan Permanent Undersecretary for Foreign Affairs was very intrigued that, successively 3 Indian High Commissioners to Sri Lanka have been short-statured. And he was very curious, but of course, it was very undiplomatic. But one day he found the courage and he asked Ambassador J.N. Dixit, he says, Excellency, if you don't mind, it's a rather delicate question, but my curiosity is killing me, can I ask it? He says, yes, Excellency, go ahead. He says, why is it that India has chosen to send 3 successive High Commissioners to Sri Lanka who are not very tall? Then Ambassador Dixit thought about it and he says, we have been told to keep a low profile. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you so much. I just want to mention here that since Ambassador Swarup mentioned 1955 was in a way the year of Indian diplomacy. For the first time, we have to remember that India did not have freedom before 1947, and we therefore did not have a diplomatic brigade like them. So what was happening in 1950 onwards, because we had Sukarno in the first Republic Day, all these, heads of states and heads of government started visiting India for the first time. And 1955 was really landmark because we had, people like, say, I think Khrushchev who came to India in 1955, and thereby many others who came in. And the chief of protocol at that time was none other than the former private secretary of guess whom? Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Even Jinnah's private secretary was ultimately an Indian diplomat who was absorbed into IFS, Indian Foreign Service, and that's Mirza Rashid Ali Beg. You can also find him in my book. I want to ask, because they dealt with, of course, apart from protocol, they also dealt with many crises, many turmoil from day to day. Many of the things that they did, be it medical diplomacy, like we did during the COVID-19, or say even food crisis, food diplomacy. They dealt with many things. Our time is actually running out, so I'm going to turn to the panel and ask them, how does an Indian diplomat conduct himself or herself today while dealing with many challenges? And I would turn to Mr. Vikas Swarup to tell us a little bit about the challenges that you might have handled in your career, and one by one perhaps you can join in.
No, the popular impression of diplomats is that, these are out-of-touch elites who are roaming the cocktail circuit and kissing the hands of queens and princesses, etc. And as someone remarked, that diplomacy is 30% alcohol and 70% protocol, which is, of course...
What about tea and call?
Also mentioned tea
but actually diplomacy is very, very serious business, and actually the range of issues that diplomats have to deal with, from trade negotiations to nuclear disarmament, dealing with the diaspora, commercial issues. And today's world, I think in particular, the world has become so interdependent, so interconnected, that we need many more diplomats, rather than less. And of course, all of us have faced challenges. In my very first posting in Turkey, I was sent to the border of Turkey, Syria, and Iraq to rescue the Indians who were fleeing Kuwait after the first Gulf War. So that was my first experience. But I think the most hair-raising experience I had was when I was deputed with Mr. Natwar Singh, and we were going to Pakistan. I think this was in February 2005, to sort of kickstart the composite dialogue mechanism with Pakistan. And one of the advantages of working as the director EMO is that even as a young officer, you have lots of flunkies who take care of you. You have a chauffeur-driven car, and you have minions who do all the stuff so that you can handle the minister. So we were traveling to Pakistan in an Air India plane, in an Indian aircraft, in an Indian Air Force plane. And 30 minutes before landing, I just told the protocol officer, I said, I just want to see what visas have the Pakistanis given me, because I did not even bother. They went, took the passport, got the visa stamped. So he brings my passport, and I flip it through, and I say, but this is the expired Pakistani visa. Then I look at my passport, I said, this is my expired passport. And he says, sir, it was the first passport in your drawer, we just took it. And the immigration also stamped it in Delhi. They also said, VIP hai, jane do, I said, my God, I'm landing in Pakistan without a Pakistani visa, and I'm going to cause a diplomatic incident now. I'll be deported, and the headlines will be Indian diplomat deported from Pakistan. It will crash the foreign ministers meeting. What's going to happen? And I was literally on tenterhooks that, as the plane was landing in Islamabad, that what's going to happen to me. But that's where, old world diplomacy kicks in. Just before being director EMO, I was director in charge of Pakistan. So I had enough friends in the Pakistan Foreign Service. So when the plane landed and I got down on the tarmac, I caught hold of their protocol officer and I said, just a minor irritant, they got my old passport, I don't have the latest Pakistan visa, etc. He said, Sarup Saab, ab aapko hum report to nahi kar denge na, aap to hamare dost hain. Don't worry, tell the Air India plane to get your passport the next day. So luckily a diplomatic incident was avoided.
Yeah, thank you so much. Ambassador Raghavan, if you could recollect, I understand you were in Singapore when the Nirbhaya Kand happened, right?
Yes.
During that
yes.
time. So, these sort of crises, what sort of, how did you all deal with these crises in your career?
Well, in my knowledge, most of protocol is good luck. And there are 100 possible things which can go wrong. And most of the time, they don't go wrong because you have people who are trained and motivated and they make sure things work out. But before I come to Nirbhaya, let me just add one story about Mr. Natwar Singh visiting Islamabad. I was Deputy High Commissioner then. And, how the visit begins, how an important visit begins, really defines the visit. And Pakistan, the Indian Foreign Minister coming to Pakistan is like the Indian cricket team coming to Pakistan. Everyone is nervous as hell. So we had to get the visit started on a good note. And everyone thought one good way of starting the visit was to take Mr. Natwar Singh to a bookshop. And by a stroke of genius or luck, the bookshop owner knew we were coming, and he had plastered
Mr. Natwar Singh's books.
with Mr. Natwar Singh's books. The display was just full of Mr. Natwar Singh's books. And Mr. Natwar Singh entered and was delighted. After about 10 minutes, and he bought a few books, he smelt a slight rat and he took me aside and said, tell me, Raghavan, hand to your heart. Did you get this organized? And I told him, no, sir, I didn't. You're a household name here. And after that, we knew that the visit would just roll on its
He
own.
was quite mercurial.
In my book, I have actually not dealt in detail with Mutama, because everyone remembers Mutama as the first female recruit, the direct recruit. But I actually looked at other women who joined the service, and we were just discussing before the discussion here that the first Indian Foreign Service officer who was female, what's her name? And I actually write about her in my book, and that's actually none other than Sarojini Naidu's daughter, Leela Mani. So I wanted to ask Ambassador Puri to remember and recollect how difficult it was to be a female Foreign Service officer in your times, and also before you.
Well, first of all, I would like to pay tribute to CB Mutama. She was not only the first civil service entrant, she was the first woman Foreign Service officer. She was the first woman High Commissioner and Ambassador. So, and she was the first woman who stood up for the rights of women in diplomacy, in Indian diplomacy. And she, in 1979, I joined the service in 1974. In 1979, she filed a case in the Supreme Court which resulted in a total reform in our rules and leveled the playing field for women recruits and women officers after that. And the Supreme Court very nicely, very firmly noted in the judgment that you should overhaul the entire rules of services to make sure that you don't need gender charity or sporadic, petitions, writ petitions to spur change and gender justice. So this is something that is her major contribution. Apart from being being a great woman, great officer in her own right, not necessarily, one doesn't have to qualify that. But let me tell you my 2-3 interesting stories with some of the men recruits that we've been talking about. Beginning with Eric Gonzalez, when we finished our language training, Mr. Gonzalez called Hardeep and me in and said Hardeep is my husband, and he was also in the same mission, and we had finished our language training, and he said, okay, I'm going to make you, he asked me to be the head of Chancery and do political external work, and Hardeep will be political internal, and he will be doing commercial and press. So I said, I don't accept this. Why are you giving me this? So I would love to do press and media and communication. So he said, you know, it's nothing about you, but the Japanese society is not ready to accept women diplomats. And, you know, the media in particular is very patriarchal here. So then I said, give me 2 months. Give me a trial period of 2 months. And if I don't perform, if I don't succeed in, you know, making a dent in the Japanese media, then you can give me head of Chancery. But I don't accept. So he was so good. He said, okay, you have it. Let Hardeep do HOC meanwhile, and you do. So that's how, and he gave me that chance, and I proved him, you know, I lived up to his faith and was a double hit because I was a woman speaking Japanese, walking into the offices of editors and getting full-page supplements, you know, for India at a time when India was not such a big story. The other story, if we have just one quick, the other story I have is of both Natwar Singh and Mani Dixit. I was Under Secretary Pakistan. Natwar Singh was the High Commissioner. Before that, K.S. Vajpayee was. And when Narasimha Rao visited for the first time, it was considered an attempt to thaw Indo-Pakistan relations. And it was a very significant visit. And those days, Under Secretary Pakistan was a very important, you know, window, a relationship builder, and very important conduit between two countries. And it was a very, very key relationship. So when I went there, we found out that I was not invited for the state banquet. I was told कि आपके लिए खाना यहाँ पर आने वाला है. We were staying in a state guest house. खाना आपके लिए यहाँ पर. I said, why? So I protested and I went to Mani Dixit, who was JSXP. And then Ram Sathe was there. So we all talked to each other, and then Mani Dixit went to the Pakistanis and said, if Mrs. Gandhi comes, and Mrs. Gandhi was the Prime Minister at that time, if Mrs. Gandhi comes, are you going to make her eat in the pantry? So, but they were very firm because it was General Zia's government. It was a totally, you know, misogynist government. But, you know, they stood up for me, and every time this happened, and the first time it happened with Natwar Singh. I was the liaison officer with the first Sikh Jatha that went. Again, another element of the thaw, but from the Pakistani side, it was an attempt to create a Khalistani initiative. But, so I was the liaison officer, and this 13-member Sikh Jatha was called by General Zia to meet them. And my name was not in the list. But Natwar Singh said, ye kaise hua? वो तो liaison officer हैं, वो तो जाएंगे. And you know, he was this imperious, authoritative Indian diplomat.
He would rarely refer to an ambassador as an ambassador. He would often say, Rajdoot ko bulao.
Exactly. So he said, she's coming with me in my car. And so we drove into this General Zia's residence. And when we stood in line to be received by him, he came one by one, these burly Sikh Jathedars. He embraced them, Jaffi Bappi. And then when he came to me, he stood like that and with his lashless eyes stared at me for a while. But very quickly, he did an adab and moved on. 15 minutes into the meeting, and somebody comes to me and says, Begum Sahiba, aapko yaad kar rahi hai. And his wife was sitting on the other side of the garden, tea and all beautifully laid out. And I couldn't say anything. I was sitting there taking notes, and I looked at Natwar Singh, so that I moved on. And,
Thank you so much.
And exchanged notes with Begum Zia on the pochas, whether the pochas in Chandni Chowk, Salwar pochas in Chandni Chowk are as chauda or as narrow. So these are the perils of being women diplomats.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think the time has run out, so can we do a quick, just because we are talking about the first recruits, I just thought maybe you could take a look at the first recruits. Can we have the slides, please? Yeah. So it's just very, very quickly, you have to your right, that's PRS Mani, that's Poonamali Ramakrishna S. Mani, a former military man turned journalist turned diplomat. He was instrumental for establishing India's relation with Indonesia, and also, if I can say with a bit of, my usual, as you mentioned, the style, that he is actually the father of India's food diplomacy, because India was facing a lot of food scarcity in the 1940s, and he helped establish that food relation with Indonesia. So that's him with Sukarno, again in the late 1940s, that's PRS Mani. Then again, I don't know if it is moving. I don't know if it is working. Yeah. It's not, no? Right, yeah. So I think, is it?
Yeah, it moved.
Oh, yeah, it's moved. So you see, there is again, one of the first female recruits, you have Meera Ishardas Malik from Punjab, that's the other Punjab. She came from, she was part of that partition generation. And there's a very rare photograph on the left with Meera Ishardas Malik to the extreme right. She is here standing with Mao, and also with her future husband, Sumal Sinha, a brilliant Chinese expert, who actually continued to have a brilliant career subsequently, but then Meera Ishardas Malik had to leave the service because those days women foreign service officers weren't allowed to marry. So Meera Ishardas Malik, as you can see, those very early Chinese factory. Here is Meera's driving license in China. Again, Meera with Sumal Sinha. Again, Meera visiting some of the monuments in China. I think it's not again stuck. That's it, perhaps. Some of the little photographs that are perhaps
I
uploaded.
must say that the photographs are just wonderful because some of them, we have never seen before.
So thank you so much, and thank you so much for being here. And I hope, again, of course, you can see Mirza Rashid Ali Beg in this photograph. It's perhaps a little slow, and you have on the left K.M. Kandampilli. Again, Mr. K.M. Kandampilli, one of the most fiercely secular Indian Foreign Service officers who actually worked in the Vietnam Commission in the mid-1950s. He was also instrumental in controlling riots in Delhi. One of the most trusted lieutenants of Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. Again, K.M. Kandampilli in Beijing, and K.M. Kandampilli with his wife, So these are some of the photographs, and if you pick up the book, maybe you can see more. And thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, we can do that. Okay. So just a note from the organizers: in case anyone has a question, then we could take it, because I think if you have any question, please can direct it to the panel.
We have time.
Okay, we have one question there. Can you please ask? Yeah. Okay, I see more hands. Yeah, sure.
Hello. My question is to anyone who can answer. There's this recent Netflix series, The Diplomat. I'm not sure who has seen it. That shows how US diplomats, sort of meddle the crisis between UK and Russia and how they potentially stop the war. And they subtly mention how they can, even have the power to start a war. I mean, of course, that's cinema, so there must be some sort of exaggeration.
That's a question for Vikas Swarup to answer.
So my question is this, do diplomats or the diplomatic teams really have the power to either start or stop a war between two countries? Thank you.
Well, they can if they have no political masters controlling them. But actually, it's the political masters who decide these things. Diplomats implement these things. But certainly, diplomatic advice is what these decisions turn on. If diplomats consistently give an advice that, yes, this is the time to go to war, we have to do it, then the political leaders will take everything into consideration and then take a decision. More in terms of stopping wars, you see, there is a lot of nitty-gritty when you sign deals and ceasefires and all that. And a lot of that is left to diplomats. I mean, everywhere the diplomat will go back to the political leader to say, is this all right? We feel this should be done, and this is it. And the ultimate sign-off has to be of the political leadership.
But
Thank you so much.
May I add to that the ultimate objective of diplomacy is to prevent war and wage peace. And that I use very purposefully, waging peace. That involves everything, what Navtej also said.
Thank you so much. I think this question answer will continue after the session because the next session is actually here. So thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here.